Good afternoon. I was going to say, everybody still there with me? It's a pleasure to be here today. Dr. Clay asked me sometime back in September if I'd be willing to come and speak and talk to some young folks, and of course I was like, I'd be glad to. Anytime that man puts a call out to me, I'm ready and willing to answer and respond. So with that said, give you a little bit of background about myself. As Dr. Clay mentioned, I went to Olivet, studied journalism, and going in, I knew I wanted to study journalism to some degree, but I thought it was going to be print, newspapers, magazines, something of that nature. But then people were like, oh, you have a fairly decent voice. You used to think about radio. I went, really? So I tried radio, found a passion for it, a love for it. That pushed me in the direction of broadcast and things of that nature, went to state. And while I was at Michigan State, my goal and my aspiration was to study, management aspects of media. So I wanted to, at one point, manage my own radio station, eventually get to the point of owning my own radio station, hopefully a chain. And then while I was there at State, I was talking to another one of my friends. He was like, what's missing in the Midwest is like a black cable station like BET, because the Midwest is a different vibe. I'm like, you're right. Because I'm originally from Kansas. So I'm like, man, you go through Kansas, you go through Missouri, you go through certain states in the Midwest. It's not the same as the East and the West Coast. There's a different vibe. There should be a black cable network. And so I started to aspire for that. But then while I was studying in my MA program, I started going, man, there are a lot of problems for people of color and women and so forth to own stations. There are so many hurdles and obstacles in front of us that we have to overcome. And I started to wonder, why are they there? How long have they been there? So that's what motivated me to want to go back to school after finishing the master's and pursue a PhD to be able to research this as well as teach it. So that's just a little bit of brief information about how I got to where I am and being able to be in this position to talk to you about media in some way, shape, and form. And so with that, I also draw great attention to the idea that media is an institution. If I were to ask you, where do most of your perspectives on values and beliefs, what's right, what's wrong, who's good, who's bad, where do they come from? Where do you get these ideas from? The news, where else? Social media, think non-media first. Where do the concepts of who you are, family, what else? Experiences. But experiences come through who? Through what? Family, friends, social circles. Who said books? Schools, books, and somebody said church. 3 or 4 primary areas that we get our goals, our values, and our beliefs from: family, school, church, and I'll add one more in there: government, arguably. These are some of the areas in which we get these values, but people often overlook media as a source of providing these, as an institution that helps us understand life, who we are, who other people are, and how we are supposed to live or should be living. And so this is one of the biggest things that I get into conversations with people about and helping us understand, how did I get to appreciate who I am or what I am, and did media factor in it at all when we start talking about these ideas of media influence? This picture up here, you see this image. Can you make sense of it? What does it look like to you? He looks like he's fighting somebody, okay? What else? Anything else come to mind when you look at this image? He looks like a ninja, possibly. What else? Anything else? Kind of like Rambo. I didn't even see that one. Anybody know where? Oh, go ahead. Okay, ancient, some historical in some capacity. Anybody know where this image comes from? It comes from a popular movie franchise. Not 300. Good guess, though. I can see why you would think that. Popular movie franchise. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it's kind of popular that I don't know if this is really your genre. Nope, not Robin Hood. Say it again. Not Assassin's Creed, but that's a good guess, too. I think I might have heard it. Yes, sir. This comes from the Lord of the Rings film franchise. Anybody know who this represents? Well, first of all, let me ask you, is there anything unique about the Lord of the Rings when you think about who you see and what you see in this film? What do you see? Yeah, you know. What don't you see? Let me ask that question. What don't you see? Yes, us, people of color. You look at that film franchise, there are no people of color embedded in there, especially amongst the heroes and the primary characters that are moving the storyline. But when you watch the second addition to this film franchise, the second film that comes out, in the text of the film, there are enemies to the good guys. Most of the enemies are like this mythological eye that's in the sky and everything, and then you have these ogres, these orcs that are running around, but there are also these human characters that are fighting on the side of evil. And you're introduced to these human characters in the second film, and I watched this, and I broke this down to a friend of mine when I told him this is what I used to apply for the PhD programs. He's like, you see all that? I was like, yes, if you watch this film. So when you watch the film in the second edition, they say these are the humans that are fighting on the side of the bad guys. I can't think of the names of them right now. But what you see are men dressed like this, and then they're also riding through the forest. Anybody know what kind of elephant they're riding on? Oh, I just said elephant. Never mind. I meant to say animal they're riding on. They're riding on elephants as they walk through the forest. What do you associate elephants with most likely? Let me ask, what region of the world? Africa, and one more region, Asia. Africa and Asia, both areas in terms of where marginalized people come from. So you're mainly going to associate somebody that's riding on an elephant coming from this type of area. But then not only that, it's a little hard to see in this picture, but if you see the way they're dressed, you really would associate it with like Persia or a Middle East continent or something in Asia, North Africa. Then if you look at it historically, there once upon a time was a great military leader that led one of the greatest charges in history against, somebody mentioned Rome, against the Roman Empire. Anybody know who I'm talking about? Say it again. Hannibal. So when you look at this idea of a group of people riding on elephants through the forest to overcome something that's supposed to be good, that's a lot of contextualization going on in there for us to make sense of who's good, who's bad, what's right in the world. It could be problematic if you look at it like that. So this is what draws me into understanding or appreciating media messages. What are we looking at here? What is this artist's depiction of? Slave trade. This is an artist's depiction of the slave trade. So when I look at this image, I realize or appreciate that once upon a time in America's history, an image of this nature showed up in somebody's newspaper, some sort of flyer or pamphlet saying, come out to the slave auction this weekend. And it may not have been worded this precise manner, but come out to the slave auction. These are the caliber of slaves that we have on hand for you to inspect and potentially purchase. So we can understand or appreciate that media has contributed to the normalization of the valuing of the black body in a particular method and manner. And it continues on to this day. How many of you are in here are fans of sports and athleticism and watching the NFL and the NBA? What happens when a young man goes from the college ranks to the professional ranks? Say it again. NFL draft, but I heard another word in there, the combine. How many of you have ever watched the combine? What do you usually see in these guys when you see the combine? Measurement, wingspan, height, vertical jump. And they're usually half naked. They're not to this degree, but they're usually wearing some tight spandex short, and if they have a shirt on, it's really tight or something of that nature. So it's almost to this level. And it's arguable just in regards to this as a form of slavery because you look at it in the one hand and you think these guys have the option whether they want to play this or not play this. They're making a lot of money. But when you look at the idea of valuing a human being for what he or she can do for your franchise, there's a lot of similarities between the measurements and the establishment of what that person is compared to the slave trade auctions back once upon a time. What do you see here? A lynching. And I meant to say, I'm sorry, some of the images and a couple of the audios that I play in this may have a little bit of graphic nature to it. But if you look at this image, one of the things that I appreciate at this image, not appreciate, but understand or respect, is that in this era of U.S. history, an image like this was likely to show up on a postcard and be sent from one family member to another. Hey, Dad, just thinking about you. Like, what the? And you're talking about devaluing the black male body, normalizing of the brutalization of the black male body. It can't get any normal than taking a photo of it and just transferring it and sending it across the nation. There we go. How many of you are familiar with Tulsa, Oklahoma? Oh, good. Well, a number of hands go up. Let me ask this question. How many of you born after 1991 are familiar with Tulsa, Oklahoma? Okay, one hand goes up, another hand. Then come to the younger folks. You've already come to us. Help me, young man. What's Tulsa, Oklahoma represent? Okay. He has a little bit of knowledge. bombing, setting fires to building. What you have to appreciate about Tulsa, Oklahoma, once upon a time in American history in the early 1900s, is that Tulsa was it had a thriving black community in terms of economics, in terms of families, and the center that it was there. It was almost considered like a mecca for black families and black communities. And then you think about where Tulsa, Oklahoma is in the middle of Midwest America. My sister lives in Oklahoma right now with my nephews, and every day I'm in prayer like, oh, I hope you all are okay. Because there are still a lot of old traditional normalized values in regards to the black male body or the marginalized male body that you have to understand or appreciate that exist. And in the 1920s, it was really bad in regards to you being successful. I'm not. We cannot have this. And so as you mentioned, the whole community within Tulsa, Oklahoma of this black community was bombed, was attacked by those white citizens that lived in the surrounding areas, threatened by the success that these families, that these business people were experiencing. What I find really interesting, I don't know if we have any fans of HBO films and shows, but the most recent show that HBO has rolled out, Watchmen, the first scene was the Tulsa, Oklahoma bombing and situation. I was like, what? I didn't see none of this in all the previews that they had running up to it, so I just took a chance to watch this show, like, what's about to happen in the show? Let me check it out, see what happens. And they go right into Tulsa. I said, stop it. Because I was just talking about this a year ago, and people were like, how do you know about this? I was like, I don't know. I ran up on it in history. Somebody educated me. And so I was like, they didn't put this in mainstream media. How are we going to respond to it? Not only as white people that are watching this, but as the black community and others that are watching this, how are we going to make sense? And I want to see where they're taking this storyline. Because they have now challenged us in mainstream film and television to come face to face with what we've done in America or what we've been victim to in America and hopefully talk about it. A couple more and then we'll be moving forward. Hopefully, those of you in this room know who this young man is. And I'm again asked, those of you born after 2000, can you tell me who this young man is? Yes, sir. Emmett Till. And what you have to appreciate about Emmett Till and his life and the tragedy of his life is that arguably this young man's life was the catalyst for the civil rights movement. And not only his death, because as you saw a moment ago, a lot of black bodies had been put to death prior to Emmett Till. But what happened was his mother. What did his mother decide to do? Open casket. Media shows that picture of an open casket. That moves the tragedy of the brutalization of the black male body, and especially for very minimal, arguable offenses, to become not only a national conversation, but an international conversation. And this is why media is important too, because what happens with the civil rights is that television is on the growth in regards to being in people's homes. And so you now have the televised versions of these protests of black, white bodies out there marching, going against certain normalizations. And that's being transferred into everybody's homes on a regular basis to say, oh my God, it's one thing to read about it in a paper, but then when you have the visuals and the audios coming into your home on a nightly basis, that moves the needle. So media has been instrumental as a tool in trying to progress human and civil rights. Those of you born after 1994, can you tell me what you're looking at? Yes, sir. Rodney King. I was in high school when this happened. And as a young black man, what do you think I was feeling at this moment as I'm watching this transpire on television? Say it again. Not maybe like rage. It was rage. It was anger. That's why when you listen to songs by Ice Cube and certain artists of that generation, that is rage against what America had been doing to us, continues to do to us. Can anybody tell me who this young man is? Anybody born after 1999? Yeah, I'm putting these images up here for a reason. Anybody? After 1999? Anybody? Okay, yes, sir. You're on the right path, yes, sir. It's Amadou Diallo. 1999, this young man is coming out of his house in New York, shot at 41 times, unarmed, shot at 41 times, hit 19, unarmed. What threat was he to law enforcement? What threat was he to anybody on the street at that moment that he had to be shot at 41 times? I can tell you what threat he was. The color of his skin. And at that time, in media, the normal representation of black men in television and in film was as thugs, criminals, anything that was a threat to society. Of course, we move into a little bit more recent history. All of you know who this is, right? Somebody? Trayvon Martin. Now, of course, this is just tragedy just in regards to, it wasn't even law enforcement that took his life. It was a man that was neighborhood watch, vigilante type of activity. But I'll tell you something that I learned when Trayvon happened. I was teaching a class, and there was another interesting thing that was happening in media at the time. Because remember, Trayvon's story didn't come out immediately when it happened. It was like 3 or 4 weeks later before national news really started to get wind of this and it became more public knowledge. It wasn't an immediate thing. It took time before it actually came to our knowledge. But around that same time, a popular film was being released. And in the midst of this popular film, some of the fans of this book franchise were upset by the person that they cast to be a little girl in this film. How many of you have ever seen the Hunger Games? Heard of the Hunger Games? Okay, a couple people have seen it. You remember there's a little girl in there that helps the main character along, little black girl? Little black girl. I can't remember what her name is, but it's a little black girl. Well, in the book, there's not necessarily any designation to say that she was African American or that she was black, but when the author describes her, you get the sense that she is definitely a girl of color and most likely black, according to the description. But in the midst of this, a lot of the fans of the book franchise, when they saw the movie rolling out and who the cast was, were upset that this little black girl had been cast to play this role because she is a crux to the book, to the storyline. And reading the books, a lot of these fans loved her. They suffered when the little girl passed away when she, I'm sorry, a little bit of a spoiler alert if you haven't seen the film or you thought about watching it. They suffered when the little girl passed away. They felt emotionally attached to this character. But then all of a sudden when they see this little girl on screen, they're challenged to emotionally connect with who this character is now. She's not black. She couldn't have been black. Why? You're no longer connected to this character or what she does for the main character because now she has brown skin? I liken that to Trayvon and how in the U.S. we historically have had a problem when we see little brown boys and girls abducted, harmed, murdered. And on how a national scale, the sympathy, the empathy does not go out always the same as if we have, what was the little white girl's name in the 1990s, Benedict. She was kidnapped. It was a whole big thing. Thank you, Ramsey, the little, yeah. She was like a little pageant queen. And when that happened, it became a national story. Everybody's emotions and hearts went out. But we have a challenge when it is a young black body that is nonsensically taken from us. Can you tell me who this young man is? Tamir Rice, yes, sir. For me, when I look at this image, I think, I have a son now. My son is 4, and since he's been a little child, people, oh my God, he's so cute. A little old white woman coming to, he's so adorable, he's so cute, he's this, he's that. Everybody that sees him, he's adorable. And I began to ask myself, at what age, at what point does he go from being adorable and so cute to a potential menace to our society that people, when they see him, no longer go, oh my God, and they watch him with that eye. I'm going to be observing because my understanding is going to happen at some point, considering historically what we know in this nation. And what point is, because when this young boy can be outside with a toy gun and a police officer roll up and potentially think that he has a real gun and not think, oh, maybe he's playing cops and robbers, or maybe he has a water pistol, and takes his life, I think, what was he, 11, something along that line? And take his life and not feel any remorse about it. It's a little slow for me right now. I don't want to push it again without knowing. There we go. Last one in this regard. This brother's name? Eric Gardner. You know why he lost his life? Selling cigarettes. You see 2 officers already have him restrained, essentially. One in the chokehold, which eventually becomes the incident that takes his life. But you have to ask yourself, when you're watching this on the news, when you're watching this whole thing take place, was the sale of a single cigarette worth taking a man's life? I don't show you all of these images to, I think that Dr. Nifley mentioned it with the statistics, to disappoint you or depress you, but to help to understand the history and the legacy of the demoralizing and the devaluing of the black male body in the U.S. and why it's important for us to respect and appreciate and value one another and encourage the rest of this country, to encourage the rest of the people that we interact with to appreciate and value us beyond certain attributes, which I'll come to later in our conversation. So keep moving forward. This is in part the theme that brought us here today, when they see us. I won't talk a lot about it because I come back to it a little bit in some degree and thinking about the recent series that's been created on Netflix. But we're looking at the Central Park Five. 5 young men wrongly accused of brutalizing, raping, and nearly killing a white woman in Central Park. Why was it so easy for these young men to be singled out and to be determined the cause of the brutality that this woman experienced? Because historically, in our country, unfortunately, media has contributed to the lens in which we see our young black youth, our young men of color. So again, I go back to the idea, we have to know our history to appreciate where we are and hopefully change what we're experiencing and move forward. But beyond that, we need to know history in general and have an appreciation. I tried to create some of this conversation around the themes of other concurrent workshops and activities in today's, so you see across different lines as the theme of this particular section of the conversation. And this is the idea that we have to have communication with people that are different than us. You know, I think about my undergrad experience, and there was a young cat that I used to hang out with, and we were just crazy. We would do this thing where, like, he would look at me, or I would look at him, and we just start running across campus, chasing each other. Like, why are y'all doing that? We don't know. We just started doing it for some reason. If I looked at him, he just started running, and vice versa. We never knew who was it. We just started doing it. But this was a young Chicano brother. I remember being in conversation with him one time, and I think I referred to him as Latino or something of that nature. He's like, I'm not Latino. I was like, oh, excuse me? Are you Jewish? I'm like, what are you? Help me understand. And he broke it down. He said, I'm not Latino. I consider myself Chicano. And he tried to help me understand the history, the legacy of why he sees his appreciation of his Mexican heritage, his Mexican-American heritage, and this is how he identifies. I'm like, I get it. I hear that, so I respect you, and that's what you want to be referred to. I'll refer to you as Chicano. So I try to respect or appreciate when somebody tells me who they are, to at least have a conversation to understand why they identify like that, and then go further to hopefully acknowledge and respect them. If you look at this artist depiction, do you have any idea what you may be looking at? And historically, what it represents? We'll come to this young man in the back. He hasn't said anything yet. Yes, sir. Say it again. Yes, sir. And what's the Trail of Tears? To the west. Native American. And it wasn't a volunteer Native American migration. This was the U.S. government said, get out of here. I put this up there because I remember being in a conversation one time with a fraternity brother of mine, or actually it was a group of us, and my frat brother was like, black people have had it the worst in America. I was like, hold up. I don't know if I can absolutely say that. I know our history, and we've had some bad, and you know this, but I've also been exposed. My younger sister on my father's side, part of her background is Native American, so I've been exposed to some of those ills, and I have to think, that's like somebody coming into your home, smacking you, saying, go in the bathroom, that's your space now. I like this area right here. And you're living in your bathroom that you've already lived in this house for 20 years, and now this is the only place you can occupy. I'm like, man, can you imagine what that would be like? So I'm like, Native Americans may have had it pretty rough as well. Go forward. Anybody have any idea what this is? Japanese internment camps. World War II, people had a fear, especially on the West Coast. Everything that's going on, oh my God, we got to watch out for the Japanese. We need to corral them up. And it was actually a government policy to move these Japanese and Japanese American citizens into these internment camps for a time during the Second World War. Any idea? This is a tough one. India. Imperialism in India. So you start looking at countries in Persia and the Middle East, and you appreciate or respect, like they've had their own fight to go up against colonization. And they've got a lot of things that they've now embedded into their practices and their behaviors that don't necessarily have a lot of influence from their historical perspective, but more from their colonization. Last couple. Anybody familiar with Stonewall Hotel, New York, Manhattan, mid-late 1960s? Yeah. LGBTQ community, law enforcement. It was a well-known gay bar, gay establishment. law enforcement just decided one day, because I don't think they had any like real cause to go in there, like as a murder suspect or some sort of drug trafficking, anything of that nature. Went in there, busted up the party, and obviously was busting up bodies. And so I utilized this to demonstrate LGBTQ issues in regards to the U.S. historically have been problematic in regards to those bodies. And it comes back as well in terms of the idea of black male sexuality in a moment. Last couple. Anybody have any idea of this one here? Chinese citizens? Mm-hmm. Anybody know what most immigrants were doing when they came over to the U.S. in the 19th century? Railroads. There's an old saying, and no matter what there are like 3 different origin stories of this saying, but there's an old saying, not a Chinaman's chance in hell. There are 3 origin stories that I've come across, but one of the main origin stories that seems to be like right there is that it used to be that the Chinese immigrants were utilized to lay the explosive in certain places to make room for the railroads. And if they did not get out of that vicinity fast enough, what happened? And thus, not a Chinaman's chance of hell of getting out of that situation. You don't have a China. And so when you look at the legacy of certain sayings, when you look at the legacy of certain existence, you appreciate a lot of people have had it rough in this country. Come on. There we go. So this is the last one in this regard, and I purposely put a black woman up there. We know who this is, right? Sandra Bland. But I didn't put it up there not necessarily just for the tragedy of her life, but for the idea of communicating across difference, because even though she is the same culture as some of us in here, we still have a difference in regards to gender. And one of the things that we have to appreciate in the legacy in America, at least as black families and black men, is that our families have been structurally disassembled, purposefully. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Willie Lynch letters. Any of you ever heard of the Willie Lynch letters? And it's called Making a Slave, the particular letter. And part of this component is the idea, like, beat that man to within an inch of his life in front of his woman, in front of his family, because then she will start to understand or appreciate he has nothing to contribute to her. He cannot protect her. We already know he cannot financially and economically support him because he is enslaved to us. We are the economic financial controls. So once we do all of these elements, the black woman will no longer have a reliance or a support for the black man. And so we have this dysfunction now in regards to what's our role as a husband, what's our role as a father. And I tell you, every day I'm challenged with that. I'm married to a black woman, purposely, because I understood our families were deconstructed and disassembled purposefully. And I see the challenges in terms that she may be addressing and dealing with, and same for me, and we have to try and find ways to communicate and work through that. And so that's why I put Sandra Bland up there, to remember that as black men, we also have to remember our women. And even if we decide not to marry, because we still need to be able to communicate with our mothers, our sisters, our neighbors, whomever they may be, in a manner of respect. So I come to this idea, because I was like, man, how do I do the sex and the exploitation of the brown and black body, or the marginalized body? And I had to take it from a point of being a black man. I was like, what are you tripping off of? You know how to go there. What is often the association that is put on the black or brown body when it comes to sex? What are we good for? Sex. That's it. We're not good for relationships. We're not good for cultivating communication and value within genders and with one another. It's sex, and it's primarily a heterosexual nature. So a lot of other bodies are left out of there. So we look at some of the things like I grew up with, Dolomite, the Mac. They always had the images of the beautiful women wanting them, pining for them. And if you were not having this type of outcome on women, you were not a true man. Hey, the fellow that played the Mac, he wasn't like a big guy. He was slender, slight of build, but he had that masculinity. Hey, girl. Like, that's what I need to be. If I'm not going to be big, I got to have that suaveness, something. So the black male body has always been sexualized in a heterosexual manner for the purpose of interacting with women. So any other alternative to that heterosexuality was not acceptable. Any other alternative to that heterosexuality, and especially going beyond other brown and black bodies, was questionable. I did a research project a few years back. It's called I Know What Them Girls Like. It's basically a thug analysis of hip-hop content. And I came out with like 6 primary themes, because I was wondering, why are some women still gravitating to this idea of a thug? Because he's a criminal. He purposely expresses a criminalized background, but some women are like, oh my God, I gotta have something like that. I'm like, okay, I guess I don't get it. So I wanted to figure out, like, how what contextualization are some of these guys putting that might present them as a reasonable mate, as somebody like, and there were 6 themes. There were things like they show demonstration for appreciation of women. They always talk about, oh, it's because of my mama, when I get out the hood, I'm going to buy her this, I'm going to do that. And I'm like, okay, I get it. You show some appreciation. They showed appreciation for family. But the number one trait that often came through for all these thug mentalities and thug representations in hip-hop lyrics and videos was what? Sex. Girl, I can do this to your body. I can do that. When I'm done with you, it's going to be like, okay, yeah, we get what you primarily are bringing. So there's the idea of the exploitation of the marginalized black and brown body. But if you think about it beyond just the black or brown body, there's the idea of how sex is associated with other bodies too. Let me ask you this question. How many of you have ever seen a Chinese or a Japanese lead be like the sexualized, oh my God, romantic character? Can you call any? How many of you have ever seen like a Jackie Chan or what's another popular kung fu? Bruce Lee. What's my other man's name? Jet Li, thank you. Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Bruce Lee, any of these popular kung fu film stars. How often do you see romance in these films? Not often. Exactly. How often do you see sexualization? Like, oh my God, they about to do some things. Unless it's certain. Ordinarily, the yellow body, the Asian body, is not sexualized. Because I've seen and talked to scholars that talk about this in regards to, accordingly, I'm not even supposed to be like attractive or appealing in that regard. So there are problematic ways of understanding or appreciating how we put sex upon a body. Moving forward, anybody familiar with this image here? Fight starts on the court between Ron Artest and Ben Wallace. Ron Artest, at some point, he gets restrained. He's backing up. He's like, you know what, I'm not getting to this. But he does this thing where he lays down on the scorer's table. And in the midst of this, a fan throws a cup down and it hits him, I think, around the face of the chest area. He gets enraged, goes into the stands, and assaults one of the fans. Now, I did a research project on this just to demonstrate or get into the idea of how was this situation framed in terms of accountability, who was responsible, where blame lies, and everything of that nature. And in the midst of this, the thing that came across often in regards to the brown bodies that play in the NBA is that they were criminalized. It was criminal behavior. Practically every reporter, every op-ed that had some sort of mention of this, it was the behaviors of the players was criminal, it was thug, things of that nature. As opposed to the fan, or the fans, they were usually referred to as loudish, crazy, fanatics, things of that nature, but not criminal. But the interesting thing, at that point, if I remember correctly, Ron Artest did not have a criminal record. He had not been before any courts or juries or anything of that nature. Maybe after he might have had some things, but at that point, all his infractions were on the court. So that's like getting written up at work or something of that nature. Your boss is always writing you up, but that was it. But the fan that they identified to actually have incited the whole thing, he did have a criminal record. Was reported, I think, in all the articles that I reviewed, reported maybe once or twice, that he actually had a felony record and actually had been released from prison not too long before that game. But we did not really know or understand that in regards to the reporting and the idea of this. So this is what they see in terms of the black and the brown body, is this big, strong, physical being assaulting the white male. So that's why when we get to situations like this, it didn't progress. When we get to situations like this, and you're familiar with this young man, right? Who is he? Michael Brown. It's easy for an officer to report or say what he said when he responds with lethal response to Michael Brown approaching him. Does anybody remember what the officer said about Michael Brown when he was approaching him, or how he characterized him? Say it again. Said he was like a big beast approaching him. I look at this young man, I'm thinking, yeah, he is big, but you know what I see? Gentleness, a boy. I see a young man. I see a boy who's still learning the world, a boy that maybe he did steal a cigar pack or something. Maybe he did. I don't know for certain. There's the accusation, but at the same time, he's just a boy. I've seen a lot of big white boys. I went to a rural college in the middle of Michigan with a big bunch of what you would call country-fed white boys. One of my close associations was a big guy like this, and I came to find out I probably had more in common with him than I did with some of the other black guys on campus, living in a single-parent home, grandparents often helping to raise and everything of that nature. But he was a big white boy, kind of like Michael Brown, had that face that you still realize this is a kid that is learning about life. And you ask, would his life have been taken if he had stolen a cigar And the officer said, stop where you are. And he decided, like, I'm not doing anything. Would he have been shot? Most likely not. It's arguable because you say, we don't know because the situation happened. But what we do know is that because of the history and legacy of the black male body being criminalized in America, it makes it easier to say, he looked like a big beast coming at me. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this one, or at least many of you if you follow sports. The Mason Rudolph. But yeah, we were going to get there. So the incident is, it's the end of the game between the Steelers and the Browns. Myles Garrett, the black player, makes a sack on the quarterback. And in the midst of that, the quarterback doesn't appreciate it. He's already losing. He's had a rough game. He's getting whooped up all over the place. And he starts tugging on Myles Garrett. Garrett, in response, doesn't like that, starts tugging back. Now, there's been a lot of discourse. How many of you have kind of followed this a little bit? Yeah, I'm sure a few people kind of followed this. There's been a lot of discourse about accountability. What were some of the things that were coming out in regards to Myles Garrett and the accountability when this initially happened, like that following Friday or Thursday evening? Anybody remember some of the dialogue or discourse in media? He should have been arrested. Unsportsmanlike behavior. Assault. He was basically criminalized in that situation, being on the field, in which there are often fights that break out. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't remove any accountability from Myles Garrett for hitting the man with a helmet. I don't remove any accountability. But at the same time, as I was mentioning earlier, there's an overwhelmingly push to put a lot of accountability on this particular individual. And I think, knowing what I know, what I've studied, a lot of that overwhelming accountability comes from his brown, big body. Because if you watch this, one of the things that was ticking me off in the early part of the discourse is that, oh, he's this, he's that, he's done this, he should be put out of the league, he should be arrested, they should think about putting criminal charges. If you watch it closely, when DeForest, one of the Steelers players, is pushing him back, he's walking back. He's like, I'm done with it. He's still holding the helmet, and who knows what's going through a person's mind at this moment. You're emotional, there's a lot of things being said and exchanged, but he's being pushed back and he's walking back. He's not still trying to engage Mason Rudolph. Who re-engages? Runs back up on him. And like I said, I don't remove any accountability. When he does this gesture right here, boom. Because that is dangerous. Somebody could have got really hurt. But he was not the aggressor at any point, like the initial aggressor. But a lot of overwhelming accountability was put on him. Now, I put that in regards to the idea of managing your emotions. How many of us have ever been in those situations in which you might be like, I'm tired of this. I've had enough. And sometimes you got to take that 2 or 3 breaths, woosah, and pull it back in. Every time it doesn't go like that, though, and you may have an incident where you make a mistake or do something that is out of character for you for a moment. And so hopefully you can control your narrative by reining yourself back in. Anybody know how he's trying to control the narrative right now? He recently had an appeal. Oh, I got 5 minutes, I got to move. Anybody know how he's trying to control the narrative? Yep. You, right. Right. Because part of his appeal is that he claims that Mason Rudolph made a statement in the midst of that scrum about who he is as a black man in America. You get where I'm going with that. So that's part of the narrative. And the whole thing right now is it may be true, it may not be true. That's the whole, we don't know. But he is trying to accept accountability, to say I was wrong. But at the same time, before this incident, everything that I heard about Myles Garrett was glowing. He was like on track to be like Defensive Player of the Year. People often that were associated with the game spoke of him in a high manner and reflected on him as being a high caliber type of character and leader on his team. I'm not going to play the video, but what it was is one of my favorite Chris Rock comedies. And in the midst of this particular scene, he's talking about in his neighborhood who lives there. He's like, in my neighborhood, it's me. I'm a decent comedian. I do all right for myself. But then I have Mary J., one of the best R&B singers in the world. I also have Eddie Murphy, one of the best actors, strongest comedians. And he has one more person. I can't remember who it was. He lists like 4 or 5 names in terms of black actors or athletes, things that, it was Jay-Z. That's what it was. He's like one of the best rappers in all time. In my neighborhood, I have these people. You know who my neighbor is? A dentist. He's like, I live next door to a white dentist. And for me, I'm like, dang, that goes to speak. We don't have to be the athlete. We don't have to be this particular actor or singer to make it in life. And sometimes we get misled with this idea and this representation that we are supposed to be certain things. We have to appreciate and know our value beyond what we see presented in media, and that I can be an instructor. I can be a dentist. I can be a community service person and have a good life, make a living, and do well for myself and my family. One of the most profound questions I ever had asked of me was from a gentleman that this conference basically reflects when we talk about dealing with the challenges of mental well-being, when we talk about dealing with the challenges of the sexualized black body. Ernest K. Bates, God rest his soul, was only a year or two younger than me, but we lost him not long after we graduated from our undergrad. But one night, Ernest asked me, and this is when I was done like with my pursuit of athletics and trying to be a star athlete. I was now an RA. I'm like, man, I can do other stuff. I don't have to just be on the court or the field. And he asked me one night, like, Rich, why do black men get so distraught when they get cut from the team? And I had to think about that. I was like, that's a good question. Because young men in general get distraught when they get cut from the team. Because you know a lot of guys that want to be athletic, like, I want to be that guy. But then he added, I was like, that's an extra element. I started to contextualize, and I still want to do some research on this. And I was like, I think it's because the athlete is accepted is more accepted in mainstream. You don't hear white kids saying, I want to be Denzel Washington. What did you hear kids singing in the 1990s? I want to be like Mike. Oh, like Mike, if I could be like Mike. And so there's this element, I think, for the black male athlete or the young black man that says, if I get cut, man, I'm that much further from being accepted in mainstream America. I've been wrapped up. Can I finalize just a couple things? I'm at the last. No, I've been wrapped up. I've gone long. Dave Chappelle talks about coming into a house and sprinkling crack on them. And he's like, sometimes I come into the house, I'm like, do I even live here? I move that forward to this young man, to this gentleman. Henry Louis Gates was arrested in his own home. So you have to ask yourself, have we moved the needle enough to be affected and to be appreciated? And I'll wrap here. I wanted to get at least to Wakanda. Actually, no, I got it. There was one African-American male in all of this film. Anybody know who that was? Who? No. In terms of character, one African-American male character. Killmonger. What was the representation of the ideology presented behind African-American male in Killmonger? Anger. He was a radical black man. Be wary. That's how we were framed in terms of if we're educated and we realize that we've been attacked in this country and we've had problems throughout this world as angry black men, as opposed to T'Challa. I was talking to Dr. Nifley about this a while ago. We can contextualize this in a lot of problematic ways. Where I love the film, I sat in there, I was watching it with my wife, and was like, oh man, this is going to go a lot of ways. I see a lot of people trick or treat. Halloween, thank you. Next Halloween, I can see the costumes that people are going to be. Last couple things, when they see us, my wife asked me if I wanted to watch this film, I was like, no, not really, because I can't do things like this. I get emotional. It gets visceral for me. I've watched the documentaries, I've read the books and the stories. I know Trump called for them to be hanged, to be executed. And there are scenes in there that move me, and part of the reason I do what I do, as you heard in the introduction, is policy. When I started studying policy, I had classmates like, why do you do policy? Because I'm like, because media affects policy. The more you see a black male body that's being demonstrated to be criminal, et cetera, the more likely it is in terms of the policing, in terms of the laws and the legalities that are going to come down on us. And so when I see these films, it often reminds me, not too long ago in American history, I would not be the father that I am because I would not be with my children right now. It would have been legal for them to pull me away, send me off wherever the heck they wanted to. Last couple things. Sorry, I know, Rob, I apologize. Last couple things. To be a leader, surround yourself with good people. He didn't know I was going to put this up there. I've known this man for over 20 years of my life. And he is a part of a circle of people that I keep that have wisdom and discernment, that if I get to that emotional place, that I get to a certain place, it's like, hold up, Rich, you need to think about it. That's the reason why he was the best man in my wedding. Because I know if I got upset with my wife or if we were having a moment, he's not just going to tell me, yeah, dude, you need to step up. You need to handle that. He's going to rein me in. You need to think about this. Rich, consider that. You have to have people that are going to challenge you. What I don't have up there is my family, because I don't know, just going to throw them out there. My mom's like, why did you put that picture up there? But you have to have people that you consider family as well. And that's not just genetically. That's people that you're going to encounter. I consider this man, that table part of my family. So hopefully your family will grow and you will surround yourself as such. Last thing, faith. You have to have faith in some sort. I've come to acknowledge most of the impactful people I've encountered were not just Christian, they were Islamic, they were Baha'i, they were Buddhist, but the examination of faith helps you to build some sort of ideology. This particular character comes from a TV show called The Good Place, and it's an examination of heaven, hell, and how we get there, and it is interesting because he is the crux of the show now when it comes to determine whether humanity will exist or continue on. I'm like, man, they put a black man in the crux of determining whether, and he is a professor of ethics. So you have to examine ethics and faith and the understanding of faith and how it applies to humanity. And then I close with You'll See Me, something that Dr. Nifley kind of alluded to some degree. A friend that I hope to be able to see while I'm here visiting Chicago, as I was getting ready to graduate from Olivet, was like, I'm like, man, Moni, everybody keeps asking me what I'm doing, where am I going, what, et cetera, et cetera. She said, you know what, Rich? One simple thing, tell them this, you'll see me. So when people asking you things of that nature, tell them you'll see me, because you're working to put yourself in a position where you can be a positive influence and interaction with others, and they will see you doing that. And that's what I close with, and I hope we have some time for a couple of questions. I know I'm sorry.
Let's give Dr. Craig a round of applause. He will be here for the remainder of the conference, so if you have questions, please see him. We have